2, 1. Hey everybody, we're at the Imp and the Ogre. My name's Paul.
It's Ryan.
Today we are tackling Burnt Offerings.
So, Burnt Offerings by James Jacobs. So, this originally came out as a 3.5 edition D&D adventure, but is available now as a Pathfinder adventure as well. It originally was published in 2007 and basically birthed Pathfinder as a thing. This is the first thing that Paizo released following the end of their Dungeon and Dragon magazine runs for Wizards of the Coast, I guess. Once they stopped releasing the hard copy versions of those magazines and switched over to a digital content that they produce themselves. A fun fact from me, I actually have the original hard copy of this adventure because I had a Dungeon magazine subscription at the time that the license reverted over. So this is what I got instead of my last Dungeon magazines, which, as much as I do enjoy the Pathfinder books themselves, I do miss the old magazines. They were much more my thing. So, for those of you who don't know, Pathfinder basically is 3rd edition D&D. So, for all intents and purposes, it's the same.
And speaking about fun facts, you got a lot of fun facts about goblins in this adventure. The adventure kind of circles around goblins quite a bit, and there is a nice list of 10 things I like about goblins or about goblins at the beginning of the adventure, which helps you play them in the adventure.
Yeah, it was very much an effort by Paizo to exemplify what the Pathfinder setting was going to be and how it was going to be different from the standard D&D type setting, and for sure goblins were their flagship monster, if you will, that they changed, turning them more into comedic agents of chaotic evil, if you will, I guess, more of a impish, gremlinish, horrifying monster.
Yeah, very evil, cause a lot of chaos, still kind of funny.
Yeah, they're incompetent evil, I guess is the way to think about it. So the general synopsis of the adventure is that the PCs get drawn into investigating a goblin threat that's affecting the city of Sandpoint, and then from there they find more hooks that lead them into investigating greater issues with historical aspects of the campaign setting. So this book was the first part of a 6-part adventure path for the Pathfinder setting, and is a pretty good adventure as a standalone. It has some loose linkage to future events that actually never need to be addressed. So as a standalone adventure, there's no issues I would envision a DM coming into if you just wanted to run this as a one-off for a new campaign.
I agree.
General impressions. What did you think?
Thought it was great as a standalone adventure. I liked the introduction of the adventure and how they get people together. I think it plays nicely. I think things happen logically. There's reasons for players to go places, and they're given clues to go to places. There's not a lot of wandering around trying to figure out what to do next.
Yeah.
Which I think is good. I don't think it's too railroady in the sense that you explicitly tell them that this is the place that they need to go. But they've got a good reason for exploring things.
Yeah, there's a logical progression for the most part, right? They kind of stumble onto this greater plot as they go along. I like that there's a bunch of sort of self-contained location-based encounters, right? They don't all happen in the same place. The end dungeon is maybe a little long for my likings, but what I do like is that the adventure does a good job of sort of foreshadowing and building sort of the threat up to this boss.
Yep.
Right? Like you don't even know they exist to begin with, and as time passes, you get hints more to this person, and then you start dealing with their lieutenants, and then ultimately you come to the final conflict to eliminate, what was her name, Nalia, or whatever, as this crazy lady, for lack of a better term there. What else did I want to mention before we dive into the nitty-gritty details? Oh, ultimately, the Goblins. I can't say enough how much I enjoyed the Pathfinder Goblins and what they did to them. So that being said, I have to sort of mention that the second edition of Pathfinder is coming out soon, I think. I don't remember the exact date. But I was very disappointed to find out that Goblins were becoming a playable default character race in the second edition of the game, because they're evil little monsters, as we will illustrate. But like, their iconic weapons are named after what they're designed to do.
Dog Slicer
and Horse Chopper. These are monsters that hate innately horses and dogs. So you're going to have characters that just go around stabbing horses and eating dogs. Like, thematically, it feels like it ruins it a little bit.
Yeah.
But whatever. That's, people want to play as little machines. Their business.
Wonder if we have Sam Riegel to thank for that.
That's D&D Goblins, and
he's playing one though.
I know. I don't care for that whatsoever, but
to begin this adventure, I liked what they did with the start of this adventure, and that all the DM really needs to ask the PCs is like, why would you be at this festival?
Yeah.
When there's no onus on the players to think of a reason why they're together, because they have a certain, after the first events, they've got something in common. So I like that it eliminates the need for like to organize why you're there or working together.
Yeah.
Because you do end up working together when the town is attacked by goblins.
Yeah. One of the nice things about Paizo Adventure Paths in general is all their adventure paths come with free player's guides. So this one came with a player's guide and these player's guides are designed to provide insight and tips for players to make characters that fit in with the campaign. So there's lots of suggestions in these, and for this one in particular, about why they'd be there, or based off of their class, and they could be locals, and there's hints and all that type of stuff. So it is better than the usual, you're all sitting around a table at a tavern and then things happen. I do like that this adventure kicks off with a bang from the get-go. You know, it starts off, there's some boring speeches, and it's the Swallowtail Festival is basically a dedication of a new cathedral, which presumably, if your players were interested in it, you could have them ask, or they could ask around to find out, well, what happened to the old cathedral? And then that starts to tie into the over meta plots of the entire adventure. But they don't have to. I mean, it depends on how engaged your players are, and they might just be like, okay, yay, okay.
Yeah.
What's going to happen? And basically, for whatever reason, at the end of the dedication, there's the usage of a thunderstone, which is a magic item that goes boom, and that triggers the chaos.
Yeah, I mean, overall, I don't think there's too much to talk about in the, like, what happens during this. There's a few encounters with goblins, and then one final encounter with goblins. More so what I enjoyed was thematically how the assault is described. So between these small encounters with goblins, you're encouraged to read to your PCs that, you know, goblins are running around on fire and like trying to jump off roofs, but missing and falling to their deaths and drowning in pools. And I think it's funny and comedic, but also savage when you see the goblins being described killing dogs and all sorts of stuff. They really kind of like John Wick the start of this adventure for goblins.
Well, they're supposed to be horrific. And I like to think of Pathfinder goblins as like Gremlins, if you've ever seen the Gremlins movies. They're goofy and kind of funny, but also terrifying. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the idea with these types of goblins, right? Like they are trying to kill you, but they're not doing a very good job at it. Right, they're as likely to stab the guy behind you with their spear as they are to stab you,
or another goblin.
Yeah, right. So it's that idea that they're thoroughly evil and horrible little creatures. They're just not very effective.
Yeah,
you know, they get an A for effort, but
like a D.
E on execution, I guess. So there's a lot of sort of site-to-site encounters. And again, I kind of like the way they laid this out. It's a giant melee, if you will. Like, there's tons of people fighting all over the place, but you just sort of focus in for your PCs on three, I want to say.
Yeah, three
specific little encounters. The only one of any particular note is that you rescue a noble, again, his dogs who are being attacked. And that only really plays a bigger role going forward in the adventure path. But it is, again, an opportunity to sort of focus on the fact that in this encounter, the goblins are going for the dogs.
Yeah.
Right? Like, though eliminating the dogs is the focus of the goblins more so than it is eliminating the PCs.
Mm-hmm. Because they do kill the dog.
Yeah, do they?
Yeah.
Oh. Sad.
Moving forward, get through these encounters, you sort of become local heroes for the town, and there's a series of events that are meant to, one of them is meant to tarnish your reputation in town, where you tried to be seduced by
someone tries to seduce one of the
PCs. Yeah.
It gets a little episodic afterwards. I mean, I think the idea is to try to get the players to learn more about the town, right? Because there's a certain assumption at the beginning of the adventure that they're all just in town for the festival, whether or not that's the case. So the aftermath involves them meeting some of the locals and meeting, people who work at the tavern, and they're, the toast of the town, and get all kinds of accolades and free drinks and the like. Yeah, the merchant's daughter trying to lure it. I will say that there was a little bit in this episodic thing that's very focused on select PCs.
Yeah.
Right? So it basically asks you to single out a couple of your PCs for certain things to occur. So effectively, the person with the highest charisma gets targeted for seduction.
Yeah.
And then there's another encounter with the noble, and whoever seems like the awesomest, I guess, the most heroic, gets targeted for this individual's infatuation. And again, if you're not running this with the expectation that you'll move on to the rest of the AP, I think that's probably cuttable. Because the noble doesn't play another role in the current, like this particular adventure, but is important for the subsequent follow-up adventure. So this is foreshadowing that you don't need if you're running this as a standalone. One way or the other, it doesn't hurt.
Yeah.
Like it's a perfectly fine encounter. The craziest part of the what I'm calling the Swallowtail aftermath is the monster in the closet vignette, if you will. And I wrote, it gets dark fast.
Nastiness of goblins revealed.
Yeah. So it's initiated when the PCs are basically hanging about, having a drink, walking down the street, doesn't matter. But a lady, a townsfolk, runs up to them carrying a crying child and the kid's got bite marks on his arms. So the PCs run to go check it out, right? So they go to the kid's house, and they go to the kid's room, and what they find is a dead dog.
Yep.
Okay, and the kid's dad is hanging his legs are hanging out of a hole, or I guess he's hanging into a hole in the floorboards in the closet and lying motionless.
Yep. And
if you pull on his legs to pull him out of the hole, what do you find?
His eaten face.
His face and upper torso have been eaten.
And there's a goblin in the hole.
And a starved, crazed, bloody goblin with a makeshift knife comes jumping in the hole, and you kill them.
Sort of like a door, though. The hid in the closet.
No,
but like he got stuck in there and then decided to dig a hole and hide. But the dog kept going and scaring him back. And the kid was complaining about having a monster in the closet for a while that dad didn't listen to.
But basically, the goblin survives for a couple of days eating bugs and eventually can't take it anymore. So
kills the dog.
Kills the dog. Tries to eat the kid. The parents catch him. The dad chases him back down the hole, starts ripping the floorboards up to get the goblin, and the goblin slices his neck and then eats his face. Again, this is a playable class, the playable race in Pathfinder coming in the new edition. So if you want to eat people's faces,
play a goblin.
And I did like that I guess James Jacobs, the author, put a little sidebar associated with this saying like, is this too dark?
Yeah.
And if it is too dark for your players, feel free to omit it. But he included it for a specific reason, and that's being that goblins, while inept and, comedic in some regards, are bloodthirsty, baby-eating monsters. Again, playable race in Pathfinder now. And that was the whole point of this. Like, the whole point of this is to imprint upon the PCs that these are dangerous creatures, and as ridiculous and how easily they were dealt with maybe in the first encounters, that isn't necessarily going to be
always true.
The norm, right? And also, I think this particular one, I'd have to go back and look at the adventure to be sure, has some special, like, he's a different type of goblin. Like, he's a goblin warrior versus the goblin grunts that the PCs were dealing with. So he's tougher. Yeah. So he is a little bit more dangerous as well. So it's mostly there to try to imprint upon the players to be careful. Like, it's not, they're not just there for jokes.
Mm-hmm. And then you do meet another NPC, Shalelu. I think she was like the traveling ranger that would come into town every so often, figure out what's going on. She ends up being in town. She lets you know that goblin tribes are teaming up, that they're more organized, sort of alluding to the fact that this wasn't just random chance that they attacked the town, that may have been something more beyond it. And I think also moving forward, and next she gives you information about hero goblins and a bit of their history, but not so applicable to this adventure.
Yeah, it's background information for the most part. So there's a lot of basically information gathering and learning about the area, and a couple of episodic encounters that occur in this interlude. And adventure ramps back up again when the bartender, the owner / bartender goes missing, and one of her employees comes and finds you, saying that their boss didn't show up to work and they're concerned. And I believe she says that the boss gives the players a hint that their boss was going to Brothworks or whatever. So the owner of the bar also happens to be the daughter of the person who runs a glassmaking company in this little town.
I guess you would go hopefully and explore the glassworks at this point.
I think there's a time constraint, if I seem to remember. Like, basically there's goblins in there, but as soon as it becomes dark, everybody leaves. Mm-hmm. So there's an assumption that the PCs are going to go investigate immediately. If your PCs are lazy and decide not to, they could go and just see the aftermath and miss out on a little bit of information, right? I don't think there's anything there that's particularly essential.
No, I don't think so. I enjoyed the glassworks portion of this. I think, again, it really shows how mean the goblins are.
Yeah.
So there's a few encounters. I liked how they described that, if you sneak in somehow, that you can hear goblins like giggling and making noise in other rooms, and that it should be pretty easy to get around in this place. But once in an encounter, I liked how the goblins just grabbed kind of whatever they could in the room to start fighting, tongs or a shard of glass or something like that.
I like that there's a build up to the violence, if you will, and there's a lot of gruesomeness in here, again, to sort of reinforce that goblins are not nice creatures.
Yeah.
So you find signs of violence before you see the outcome. The workers' room is just blood everywhere, but there's no bodies. Where are the bodies? Oh, they've been dismembered and being burned in the forge, the kilns, and covered in glass and things like that. Like, completely disgusting. And it says, like, oh yeah, the goblins are trying to replicate their master's, masterpiece. And the owner of the glassworks is dead and has been completely encased in molten glass on a chair. So the goblins are trying to mimic that poorly with the body parts of the other workers, right? Like, it's pretty gross for an adventure. Like, compared to most adventures that we've looked at, we don't normally get into dismembered body parts and gore. This one does. So I believe in the main part, they encounter the brother or the son of the guy who's dead, Tsuto. There's the possibility to catch him.
There is, yeah.
But I don't think it's necessarily guaranteed.
No.
Right? If he just shoots a couple arrows and then dips, it's unlikely the PCs will be able to catch him, just because there's too many goblins to deal with if they're running interference. But either they capture Tsuto and find out information from him, or the missing woman, his sister, is found in the basement, I want to say. So from her, they can find more information, because basically you learn that a goblin incursion, like, they're going to attack the city. Because I think that was the whole point of this, is that Tsuto was trying to warn his sister to not be in town on a certain day because everybody's going to die.
Yeah.
And through that, you find out about Thistletop, which you may have heard of previously from Elf Chick. What was her name?
Shalelu.
Shalelu, because she would have mentioned the Thistletop goblins at the time. So basically, you have this. The rails have been laid, and you can get on the train or not. But you know where the goblins are. You know where you're supposed to go. The call to adventure has been sounded. Will your PCs heed the call?
Who knows?
It's up.
It is a nice progression of, like, information, though. Yeah. I found, it's leading somewhere, and kind of the pressure is mounting, so to speak.
The stakes are increasing, and I guess technically there's no reason for the PCs to go. Like, they don't have to.
Yeah.
What happens? An army of goblins comes and kills everybody. Right?
Yeah.
Like, they're not being forced into this. Potentially at this point, the PCs may stumble upon some smugglers' tunnels, right? Like, as a DM, you read and you find out that the guy who owned the glassworks was also working with the criminal organization and using his business is a front for smuggling, and it's associated. There's smugglers' tunnels underneath it, but associated with that is a dungeon, some ancient ruins,
Catacombs of Wrath.
Catacombs of Wrath.
Yeah, and they might not even find this, right? Because it's at the end of one of the old tunnels that like maybe they go and explore the end of this blocked out tunnel and find the old entrance to this place, and I mean, it does say that your PCs could skip this entirely, and it doesn't really matter for this adventure as a standalone. They will at some point, if you continued to play this adventure path, come back to the Catacombs of Wrath. So take it or leave it. If they don't find it, I wouldn't try and press upon them the need for exploring.
No, it does help to sort of bring the whole... blah, blah, blah. It provides some sort of hints to the greater meta plot for the entire adventure path, where you learn more about the Runelords, and because this is the ruins from a Runelord's empire from whatever it was 4,000 years ago or what have you. Also, there's a shrine to Lamashtu,
the Mother of Monsters.
Mother of Monsters down here. And I believe, if I'm remembering this correctly, the boss of the adventure, this is the shrine that she found and sort of put her on her path to where she is now. Or maybe she didn't find this one. Maybe it was just, she did. She became impregnated.
She birthed a hideous, so this the fiend of this, the boss lady of this thing is like a beautiful woman.
Asimar.
She got pregnant and gave birth to a hideous monster, and it was corrupted because of this. She was corrupted because of this shrine.
Yeah, but I think I was just misremembering. I think her and her lover fooled around in those smugglers' tunnels, and it was the proximity to the shrine to Lamashtu that caused the mutations in the baby. Yeah. Because that's what Lamashtu does. She's the mother of monsters. Now, one thing about this optional dungeon that I did like is there's the mutant goblin.
Corvus.
The 3 arms. Horror guy.
He was pretty cool.
Which was just a cool, once again, just a cool monster, which is always fun. And this would be your first introduction to Sin Spawn, which are something that's thematically associated with the Pathfinder campaign world. And they're just gross. Like there's different Sin Spawn based off of the sin. So I think these ones were Sin Spawns of Wrath. Yeah. But there's ones for all the different, deadly sins, if you will. So they're these weird magical monsters, and if you're going to be playing in Pathfinder, they're iconic, and it's an early introduction to it.
And there was another NPC down here that I liked, Aurelium, the one priest or whoever.
Oh, the closet or whatever?
Yeah, that had dedicated the study to the Mother of Monsters or whatever, but it had like corruptions on its personality, so it had like the hideous spittle that you could spit on someone and like they would puke basically if it hit them, and it's just like, I thought like Pathfinder did a good job of like creating these characters that were down there because they're super cool.
For a little mini self-contained dungeon, it's very flavorful, and you can talk to almost all of them, right? So they're not just mindless monsters. They will try to kill you, but they have good reasons for it and information from them. So it's a fun little mini dungeon for sure. I mean, the natural progression at this point is the PCs should be going to Thistletop, which is a couple days away from the town, I believe. Yeah. They should have a rough idea of how much time they have because either from Suto or from his sister, whose name I can't remember, Amiko? I think it's Amiko. An idea of when the attack's supposed to come. I didn't write it down. I can't remember. It's like, the next full moon or something along those lines. But there's an actual...
They find this journal at some point, and it has rough ideas of when they're making the attacks. Yeah.
So there is a time constraint on this. It's not a particularly tight one, but the PCs have a couple of days to get to where they need to get to. Which brings us to Thistletop. Which has some neat bits and bobs before you even get to its bowels.
So you navigate a winding maze of thistles, effectively. There's a neat encounter with a druid, goblin, who's also like fed up with the leader goblin, so like potentially you could maybe recruit him.
Potentially.
But there's like a fight ensues, and he can kind of meld through the druid ability.
I can't remember. Did I write it? Woodland Stride.
That's one. Yeah.
Now, this is a situation that if you were running this in 5th edition, this encounter doesn't work. Because while 5th edition druids do get the Woodland Stride ability, which basically means they can move through any difficult or impassable natural terrain freely. So as written, this druid can just like walk through the walls, pop through, cast a spell, walk back through, and the PCs can't follow. It's super annoying. I've run this adventure before. Like this, for players, this part is super aggravating because hit and run tactics from the druid works beautifully. They just can't deal with it unless they have their own druid, and then they have the same ability. But Pathfinder druids get this ability at level 2, I want to say, and all druids get it. I believe, and I might be mistaken here, that 5th edition druids don't get it till later, and it's limited to Circle of the Land druids, the non-shapeshifty ones. But then again, a second level 5th edition druid can just shapeshift into an animal and fly over top of it, right? Like it's not. I don't think they get flight, actually, but they can turn into a mouse and then go through the briar itself. There's other ways of getting around the problem. So it's just one of those tweaks that happen between editions and games that if you were doing the conversion to run it with the current edition, it would be problematic. I don't know enough about the new edition of Pathfinder to see if there's any issues if you were playing the new edition, but probably not. It's fun. From the DM standpoint, it's fun. From a player standpoint, it's kind of frustrating.
It's just neat because like it's fun to play NPCs as smart things.
Well, it's also an ability that doesn't get used that much, and this isn't a whole encounter that's designed around one particular PC ability.
Right.
Or a PC, a monster ability, class ability, right? And it's a class ability that normally never comes into play. Like, how many times has that ever happened? I can't think of any situations where I've had a druid be like, oh, I can just do this because of this, you know? So it's nice to have an encounter that highlights a particular class ability that doesn't frequently show up, you know? And I can't even think of another one. It's like whenever a cleric gets to turn undead, right? Like that doesn't happen all the time. So when it does happen,
makes you feel cool.
It's cool, right? I mean, it's an ability that if you never have any undead in your campaign, it never gets to get used. I'm actually playing 4th edition D&D with my kids, and one of them is a cleric, and every single fight he's like, are they undead? Because he wants to use his turn undead ability, and I'm like, it's a hobgoblin, and you know, he doesn't know what's what yet. So I'm just like, no, it's not it's not undead. I'll tell you, I'll let you know. You know, if it's a zombie or a skeleton, you can use it. So there's going to be all this build up when they finally do encounter their first undead. He's just going to be able to use his ability and be like, yes,
feels good, man.
Right? So you like to be able to use these abilities that you have.
And there's a DM note in the adventure that says like, you may think that this is ridiculous, but it's fun to feel good, you know. So let them do it. Which was nice. Another kind of before you get into the Thistletop dungeon thing that I liked is that the goblins being goblins and managed to get a warhorse in there, and it's become like the bane of their existence, and it's like stomped out a dozen goblins, and they thought that their leader could just kill it, but it broke his arm, so now it's this like terror that they have in there that they can't get rid of.
I thought that was kind of funny. I mean, it doesn't serve any real purpose other than it's a free warhorse for the PCs if they get it. If someone can make the appropriate handle animal check, they can calm it or what have you. I did like that. Basically there's the Briar Maze, and then the main complex is on an island that's attached by a rope bridge. Yep. So I did like that. Again, this is a pretty obvious trap, but if enough medium or larger creatures walk on it, I can't remember three mediums of a regular venturing party. If everyone tries to walk across it at the same time, it'll fall, and the PCs will fall into the water. They won't die, but they'll take damage and whatnot. And one note about it that I thought was funny is that originally the whole thing was set to fall and collapse, but then the goblins are like, wait, then we'll be stuck over here. So they were kind of lazy about it. So if the PCs actually do drop into the water, they can actually just climb up the bridge because it's all rigged with ropes and pulleys to reset itself afterwards. So
I really enjoyed that. Just like the goblins are smart dumb, you know, like they're smart enough to know that they'd be trapped, but dumb enough to leave it so like anyone can get in still.
To undermine the effectiveness of the defensive structure because they're lazy effectively. I thought that was great. So on top of the island, there's it's a wooden compound. Basically, it's a couple of outbuildings and a bit of a wall and some standard encounters. Nothing too exciting until you fight the goblin chieftain.
Well, in the first level, I like that I think his name is Oric. There's a male fighter that's in there that was like following them because he had nothing better to do.
I think isn't he in the dungeon?
I don't know. I have it under dungeon level 1.
Yeah, we're not in dungeon level 1 yet.
All right, we're at the doors.
We're at the top.
All right.
Do I need a map out here? Well, basically, you got to clear the goblin before you can go to the dungeon.
I skipped that part.
You did. You skipped. Talk about Chief Rip Nugget. He rides the giant lizard. Come on. Boss fight with a goblin mounted on a giant lizard. Okay. Or gecko, sorry. So it can climb on the walls, right? He's got ride by attack. So you have this little, giant fat goblin, basically, charging by on his lizard, slashing at you, and then running out of the way. There's also, I think there's a goblin, blah, 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 bard, effectively. So the bard's buffing you. There's magical support. There's other goblins helping out. There's this gecko-mounted riding goblin running around, stabbing everybody. Like, it's got a lot of moving pieces. And I think that in the adventure path, this is the first legitimately challenging encounter. Right? Like all the other ones up to this, there's, not a lot of goblins, so you can overwhelm them in action economy and what have you. Should always give the PCs the advantage. But in this fight, there's a good 5 goblins, so action economy is not hugely in the PC's favor at this point. And there's a lot of synergy built into it. So this is one of those situations where I think a party could come in overconfident, being like, everything's been a pushover so far, and then Rip Nugget could just rip them apart to be honest, just because it's a bunch of pieces working together effectively, and being mounted gives a lot of mobility. So he can get to your magic user. He can get to that archer that's been hiding in the back for forever. Well, I'm just going to go up the wall, and then I'm going to go around, and I'm going to go get that guy. So, just sort of running the numbers and actually having run this encounter, it is tricky and potentially challenging to overconfident PCs. Now, that being said, you can start with negotiation. You can talk. Bribery works with goblins to a certain extent. So there's no guarantee that PCs necessarily have to just come in swinging, but most likely that's what's going to happen. Okay, so you clear out all of the goblins, and then you find some stairs, and it takes you down to the dungeon, of which there's 2 levels. In the first level, you wanted to talk about
Oric.
There you go.
Yeah, I liked him as an NPC because it was nice that he was just kind of like doing it for something to do, but also like wasn't that interested in what was going on. So like easily swayable, like not super on board with what Nualia was doing. He liked the town. So he wasn't like stoked about the raid on it, and he's just kind of like hanging out. And you could convince him to side up with you. Yeah, he's sort of a neutral NPC, more interested in like surviving. I think he's just a mercenary that was recruited in some town or whatever. Yeah. And then the other notable thing I have here is the squid monster, the Tentamort. Yeah. If it stings you, it does constitution damage, which is 1d6, and then another 1d6 if you fail to save. which I think is like very dangerous for level 1 NPCs.
Well, you get 0 constitution, you die.
Yeah, right? So, it's tough.
Yeah, so I mean, constitution damage basically in Pathfinder, every 2 points of constitution damage is a -1 modifier to that. So if you took, say, 12 points of constitution damage, you'd have -6 to your anything with constitution. So it costs you 6 hit points, at least, I think, or 6 hit points per hit dice. So if you're level 2, it would be 12 hit points, I think, which is pretty bad. Yeah, so this level is basically just a bunch of mini boss fights, is the way I sort of looked at it, against all of Nualia's lieutenants. There's Tsuto is here. I think he's a ranger by class levels, or a ranger thief. If he escaped the glassworks, you're going to find him here. There's a wizard that you can find here. There's Auric, who you can potentially recruit. There's a bugbear ranger. I think Tsuto's a thief now that I think about it. So there's the bugbear ranger. He's actually pretty dangerous in terms of just like the number of arrows that he can pump out. And his favorite enemy is humans. So if you're human, or elves, I think, you can get just destroyed because of the extra bonus damage. None of them are particularly interesting, is the way I sort of looked at it. Most of them could theoretically be taken alive.
Yeah.
Because none of them, maybe the bugbear would fight to the death, but the humans, no, right? And then if you take them alive, then you can get information and sort of fill in some of the details of what's going on here. Reading this, I was sort of thinking that the players will probably only be able to jump on one of them, and realistically, at that, if even at that point, where they can manage to sneak up on one, you'd assume actually that, sorry, I'm blah blah blah, train of thoughts off the tracks. But what I was thinking basically is you'd assume that the noise from fighting with the goblin chief is going to alert the people below that, and individually, each of these lieutenants isn't that much of a challenge, but as a unit, right? If you have them fall back together, you effectively now have an adventuring party minus a cleric.
That's right.
Right? And as a four-person team, it's a lot scarier, right? Because Auric can keep the PCs off of the ranger and the mage, and can serve up flanking for Tsuto, and then suddenly this is a 4v4 or 5v4 fights. That's a lot scarier, especially if the PCs are injured from the previous fight. So this is one of those situations where it was like, if you run it smart and they're fighting as a unit, it's much more difficult than if you allow them to sort of be taken in their rooms alone. Repeatedly. Which is like, I find how adventures are written for, like, just, nothing exists beyond the room until your PCs are in it. Well, normally isn't it something like, the goblins are so used to hearing fights in the room right next to them, they never go look to see if there's any issues going on? Like, there's usually some sort of lip sync to explain why nobody ever looks to see if the alarm's been raised. When realistically, if a bunch of enemies show up, you don't just yell randomly, you yell, hey, there's a bunch of guys here, right? You sound the alarm. It's like the first thing that gets done. The other thing I wanted to mention in the first dungeon level here is there's the encounter with the Yeth Hound. And mostly just wanted to mention it is because they have an AoE fear effect. And if that goes off, this fight could go south in a hurry, because theoretically you could have the AoE fear go off, everybody except for, say, your mage fails it. They all peel out of there because they panic and they're just going to run for the exits. Now you have your squishiest character against this scary monster. And scary is relative, right? Like above and beyond the fear effect is not that bad, but mano a mano, your mage is in trouble. And the other issue, and this has happened in other adventures that I've run, is you have a panicked adventurer that's basically just randomly running away, and then they run into another monster. Which then runs, like, they could run into the Tentamort. And now it's one PC against the Tentamort. And then another PC runs into one of the lieutenants. And suddenly you have your party spread all over the place, fighting enemies alone.
That's the beautiful thing about like first level adventures, though, is like you could do it and nothing could go wrong.
Yeah.
It's smooth sailing, but there's always just like that. They're on the thin edge of like catastrophe on every encounter. Yeah. That's like a perfect example of that.
Well, fear effects I find in particular have that possibility because something like if this monster just had a fireball effect, right? You fail your save, you take more damage. And yes, that can kill the entire party, but something as disruptive as a fear effect can just make it even worse. Can, in some ways, can be more dangerous. In one of the campaigns I run, we had a fight recently where the barbarian big meat tank guy was the only one that failed the fear save, and he's all that stands in the way between the squishies and this horrible monster. And, he failed to save, so he dropped his hammer and then ran. And everyone else was like, well, I guess we're going to run too now because we can't fight this.
Follow him.
And that's literally what ended up happening is they just ran away and they're being chased by this big scary monster until the fear effect wore off.
Yeah.
So they could turn around. But the problem is when you're panicky, you drop your weapon. So his fear effect wore off and then he didn't have his main weapon and then, other issues happen. So something like fear maybe doesn't get used as often as necessary as you might expect. But when it works,
it works well.
It works really well.
Yeah.
It's super disruptive.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
And I guess then assuming you don't die, the party moves to the bottom layer, I guess, the dungeon, the second floor. One thing I liked about this is that the entire floor is tilted because this dungeon's actually a statue's head that broke off.
Yeah.
And it's in the ocean now. So the whole floor is... So there is a situational combat advantage based off of relative position.
Yeah, the height.
So if you have the high ground, which I thought was really interesting. Like, I never really think about doing that.
High ground should give you an advantage, you would assume, but it's like I like little environmental things like this in adventures where it's not like it's not too much work to add that in, but adds a lot of, like all of a sudden you say, oh, you've got a +2 on that, or he's got a +2 on that. And your player asks you why. You go like, oh, he's standing above you, the floor slant. And then it makes sense. And then there's this, maybe a shuffle to try and gain like footing advantage and that kind of stuff. And just adds another dynamic layer to otherwise just normal combat.
Yeah. The positioning aspect is kind of kind of neat. What else did I like on this floor?
The slashing cage trap.
Yep.
That was nasty.
I wrote, I might steal this.
What does it say? I might have written this down wrong, but 2 glaives attack 1d10 for 1d10 damage 3 times each.
Yeah.
And then you fall 20 feet.
Yeah.
After you're in there. So that's pretty much an instant death for somebody.
Yeah. I mean, basically the way it works is that 2 portcullises drop.
Yep.
Seal you in this 5-foot square with the 2 statues that drop, swing their glaives that hit you. And then the pit opens up underneath you to basically dump your corpse into the hole. And the thing about it is it automatically resets, right? So let's say you manage to jump and brace yourself and so you don't fall down the pit because you didn't die from the slashes. When the flap comes back up, if you step down again, these glaives swing again and drop you in the pit. Like if you end up in the trap, you're gonna die.
Pretty much.
It basically says that in the adventure. It's just like, if they fall into this trap, you're kind of hooped. There's not much you can do about it. So hopefully they're careful. Mm-hmm. Which they might not be because there hasn't been a lot of traps.
Yeah. It is
until this point.
It is the first trap that you run into.
One? Yeah.
So someone could die, which I think is fine. It's okay for someone to die. And then you run into Nualia here. She's the big bad of the adventure.
I think it's a bit of a letdown, mostly because she's just a cleric, and a whole party against a single magic user is never that scary. It's the whole action economy thing. The one potentially mitigating factor is is it a 1 Yeth Hound or 2 Yeth Hounds? She's got Yeth Hounds with her.
Yeah.
Again, so again, the potential with the fear effect, if PCs fail against the fear save with this monster, then suddenly it's a lot more potentially difficult. But if they don't, it's an action economy issue, right? If there's 5 PCs fighting 2 enemies, she's not scary enough.
Yeah.
Like, she can't do enough damage to really hurt,
Yeah.
To be a legitimate threat, I guess.
Yeah, I didn't think too much of the encounter, but I guess as we spoke about earlier, kind of the Razor's Edge encounter, right? Like, could go fine. They could lose badly.
Oh, yeah. It's all tied to the fear, saving the fear.
Which
right?
is, like, I think that, like, this like balance between danger and success at level 1 is like lost as soon as you start gaining levels, right? Advantages start seeming to tilt in favor of PCs quickly, especially in 5th edition.
In most editions. I mean, it's mostly just because it's the hit point factor.
Yeah.
And damage doesn't scale at the same speed that hit points do.
Yeah.
So a first level PC, a single attack can kill them from a single attack from almost anything can kill them. Whereas as you start gaining levels, a single attack mostly can't kill you.
Yeah. So, I mean, this could be the end of the adventure for the PCs, or through some high rolls and searching, they could move on to find the last bit of the adventure, the Barghest.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's one other thing I want to mention before the Barghest, just because that was hilarious. There's the golden giant's helmet that has the hermit crab in it.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's a treasury that has this giant, shining, gleaming gold helmet. It's a giant-sized helmet for a giant. And when the PCs go to investigate it, there's a giant hermit crab inside of it. So they have to fight a hermit crab that's, instead of a shell on its back, it's a golden helmet, which from a visualization standpoint, I just thought it made me smile.
Yeah,
I'm like, that's the type of thing that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
But yes, there's a Barghest. His name is Malfeshnikor.
Malfeshnikor.
Yeah.
This would, like, I mean, all I put in this is, like, if they find the door, I think it's like a DC 25 that they need to actually find this place.
Yeah.
Then they have to fight shadows, which would seem deadly on their own at level 1.
They're not going to be level 1 at this point. I mean, they're level 2 or 3, probably, based off the amount of experience that's
So that would
available.
be tough. I think it would be hard to deal with shadows.
Depends what edition we're talking about here. 5th edition, less scary, but in general,
and then they can finally run into Malfeshnikor, and he ends up being like the seed of all this evil, the one like he lured in the goblins and whispered to I mean, he's
been
trapped forever and kind of
for thousands of years,
gone
effectively,
insane and was luring people in, and
Lamesh too is affiliated with him a bit because he's a monster and they're trying to free him, and this fight is potentially difficult, but he's bound to the room.
That's what I put. Like, all you have to do is back up, and he won't leave the room. You can just shoot at him for days.
Yeah.
So it just sort of,
Yeah, he's pretty. The fight's pretty abusable and completely optional. Yeah. And there's nothing in here that's super exciting, other than you kill him for experience points. But again, the adventure mentions that he is optional.
Yeah.
Right? So killing him is not critical whatsoever. Leaving him here might be a future complication years from now.
Maybe, yeah.
Type of thing. But in general, not problematic.
Mm-hmm.
And what was I going to say? When you've beaten New Alia, you find her diaries and it fills in a bunch of information. So if it didn't make sense up until this point, you can find out what's happening and why it's happening. And again, not really essential for anything. It just kind of fills in some of the details as to why she did this. And mostly just crazy.
Well, the overarching theme of stuff is, like, I think fairly complex because it's leading into all these other modules and, like, a long campaign, right? But, like, as a standalone, you don't need to know any of that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it don't know it to a certain extent, and I don't know that it ties in tons to it. Like, the links between the different chapters in the adventure path are nebulous at best, but it's just sort of a hook that leads you somewhere else. Coming out of the first one here, there's not really a direct hook that leads you to the next one specifically. Like, finishing this adventure, there is no lead.
Yeah.
Right? There's nothing to follow up on. You saved the day, you saved the town, you eliminated a local threat. Done. Right?
Yeah.
Like, there's no dangling plot points that need to be resolved. So that's one of the nice things about it, is even though this is an introductory adventure for a longer adventure path, it's completely self-contained. It's challenging. It's got some interesting fights. It's thematically solid, right? It's not just sort of a cavalcade of random monsters.
Yep.
So if you're looking for just a good goblin beat up, I guess
this is it.
It works. It's a nice introductory level. So,
what I liked about this adventure too is it, like, it gets you invested in the town that you started in a bit. Like, and I think we've talked about this before, where it's like, it's nice to have a tying motivation around the area that you're in, right? And it's like, you've done something for the town, you've helped them out, you're kind of the local heroes, which might be important moving forward. And if you're using this as like a starting area, yeah, just provides more motivation. We talked about it with Red-Handed Doom. Like, why would you care to protect this area?
Yeah.
Right? So,
I just sort of finish things off for me. I just want to talk about Adventure Path stuff in general. When you buy an Adventure Path PDF or have a subscription to Paizo, the actual books or PDFs come with a lot of other information in it that I've never really been the biggest fan of, right? There's monster ecology stuff sometimes. There's information about the area and yada yada yada, and that's one of the reasons why I never liked the switch over to the Adventure Path model versus Dungeon Magazine, for example. I just want adventures. I don't need all of this other stuff. So people's mileage may vary on what they're looking for from a product. So that's added bonus, I guess, for some people. For me, less so. Also, I don't normally talk about price points too much when we talk about picking these things up. But one thing I did notice is it's actually cheaper to buy the full anniversary edition of this Rise of the Runelords adventure path than it is to buy each of the
modules.
They're not just a module, right? It's the package thing, right? You can't, that's sort of the issue, is you can't just buy the module by itself. You're getting the module as part of the Pathfinder package, which, it's not my favorite aspect of it. But again, some people love it. So, overall though, I like the adventure. It's, I think the Rise of the Runelords adventure path as a whole is actually one of the better adventure paths from Paizo. So, I'd recommend people pick it up. I enjoyed it. I've run this particular adventure. So
there you go. Next week, we are tackling War of the Wielded, a 3E adventure. Thanks for listening, guys.
Bye.